Older cooks always kept two separate bins in the pantry. Turns out that habit was real chemistry, worked out long before anyone had a word for it. Onions and potatoes stored close together speed up each other's decline. A lot of that old separation got lost when kitchens opened up and pantries shrank to one shelf. By the end, you'll know what's happening between them and how to give each one its own space again. That old bin habit was doing more work than tidiness ever gets credit for. Underneath it, 3 ordinary things were happening at once in that shared space, each one working against the vegetable sitting right next to it, without either one ever announcing what it was doing. One of them shows up first, as a gas you can't see or smell, and it goes straight after the potato. Another shows up as plain moisture, sitting in the air. The third is the smell you already know from cutting an onion, since that same sharp scent keeps drifting off it long after the knife is put away, even while the onion just sits there whole. Cooks who ran cellars built separate bins and chambers for this exact reason, keeping certain foods apart because mixing them together in a small space shortened everything's life a lot faster than most people would guess. Many of us already do some version of that without knowing why it works. So start with the gas, since it's the one most people have already smelled at work, without ever connecting it to onions. Onions give off small amounts of ethylene while they sit in storage. It's the same kind of natural hormone that ripens fruit, and in stored vegetables it pushes them further along toward the end of their shelf life. It isn't something wrong with the onion. Ethylene is a normal part of how produce ages in general, and onions release it steadily just by sitting in storage, whether that's a bin or a basket, for as long as they're stored. Potatoes turn out to be sensitive to it. A small dose can make a potato shrivel a little, and steady exposure over the following days or weeks pushes it toward sprouting well before it should. This isn't a guess dressed up as science either. Commercial potato stores actually use ethylene on purpose. The doses are carefully measured and kept going continuously, because that steady, controlled exposure is one of the most reliable ways to manage sprouting at a large scale, holding it back instead of triggering it. In an ordinary kitchen bin, none of that control exists. There's no measured dose and no timed release, just an onion sitting a few inches from a potato for weeks at a stretch. The potato ends up getting a slow, steady, completely uncontrolled version of the exact signal that tells it to stop resting and start growing well before its time. The effect isn't identical across every kind of potato either. How strongly a potato responds varies by variety, but the pull towards sprouting shows up across nearly all of them. Once the exposure is steady enough, the eyes darken, the sprouts push through the skin, and the potato that looked fine a few days ago suddenly needs to be used or thrown out. None of that is bad luck. It's the potato responding to a gas it's built to respond to, coming from a few inches away instead of from ripening fruit across the room. The potato is giving something back the whole time, and it comes down to plain moisture. Potatoes want a spot that's a little humid, cool, and dark. Enough dampness in the air to keep the skin from drying out and the flesh from turning soft. Onions need close to the opposite. They want cool air too, but dry and moving, with room to circulate. Onions already carry a lot of moisture and a fairly high respiration rate on their own, which is part of why they're prone to fungal and bacterial spoilage, even by themselves. A potato sitting close by raises the humidity even further. That damp air is exactly what mold and soft rot need to get started. A well-run root cellar treated this as two separate jobs, not one. Cooks built or set aside distinct spots for produce that wanted damp air and produce that wanted dry air, rather than trying to make one drawer or one bin do both at once. Root cellars that worked well were built to hold a narrow humidity band for this reason, and even a modest swing above or below it was enough to tip produce toward spoiling faster. A sealed drawer or a closed bag only makes the mismatch worse. It traps whatever moisture is already there instead of letting it move, while a container with some breathing room lets that humidity drift away instead of pooling around the onion skins. So when an onion in a shared bin turns soft, grows a fuzzy patch, or starts breaking down early, it's often not simply past its prime. It's sitting in air that a potato made too damp for it. And that's before counting what the onion itself is putting into that same air the whole time. There's a third thing moving between them, and it's a smell you already know. Cutting an onion releases a sharp compound that stings your eyes. And that comes from a family of sulfur compounds the onion carries all the way through storage, not just at the moment you slice into it. A whole onion sitting in a bin keeps giving off a faint version of that same sharp scent the entire time it's stored. That scent doesn't just disappear. Sitting nearby for weeks, it can settle into a potato skin, faint but real. Reports of a stored potato picking up an off smell or an odd taste line up with this, though the mechanism is less firmly pinned down than the ethylene story, so it's worth holding loosely. Storage onions, the ordinary yellow and white kinds, most people keep out on the counter or in a bin, tend to carry more of these sulfur compounds than the sweeter varieties do. That makes them the more likely source if something nearby starts smelling off. This effect tends to build slowly rather than show up all at once. A potato that spends a couple of days near an onion won't notice much. Weeks in a tight, closed space is a different story, and the closer the two sit, the more of that faint scent has a chance to settle in. That faint off taste doesn't always mean the potato is going bad. It may simply mean that potatoes spent weeks in a shared bin, sitting downwind of the onion the whole time, and slowly picking up a little of that smell along the way. Put those three together, and they stop looking like separate problems. Ethylene, moisture, and sulfur compounds are three different signals moving through the same small space at the same time, each vegetable working against the one beside it. A separate bin or basket never solved one of these by accident. It solved all three at once, simply by giving each vegetable its own air. That's exactly what a working root cellar did on purpose. Cooks carved out distinct spaces for different produce, learned through repetition rather than any lab, that certain things stored together spoiled faster. They didn't know the word ethylene, but they knew that keeping things apart worked, and they built their entire storage system around that one piece of practical knowledge. But that structure disappeared. It went along with the separate rooms it depended on. Older homes often had a pantry a cellar, or an unheated back room that stayed cooler and darker than the rest of the house. A newer, open kitchen tends to fold all of that into one shelf or a single pantry cabinet, and that one shared space carries the humidity and the gas from everything sitting in it, potatoes and onions included. It's a reasonable bet. A fair number of newer kitchens simply don't have the separate microclimates a root cellar used to provide, since one shared shelf can't hold several different climates at once. That gap sounds like a renovation problem, but it isn't. None of this calls for one. Give the onions their own spot first, since that's the easiest fix, with the biggest payoff. Cool, dry, and with some airflow around them. An open basket or a bowl works better than a sealed drawer. Keep the potatoes somewhere dark and a touch more humid, away from the onions and away from direct light, so they don't turn green or start sprouting early. If space is tight, even a small second basket works. So does a paper bag over one of the two, or just a few feet of distance between them. Check on both every so often, too. A bin that's doing its job still needs a look now and then. Pull any sprouting potato or soft onion out fast, since one struggling vegetable in a small space can speed up the same process for its neighbors all over again. That's really the whole fix. 2 small spots instead of one shared one. It's often enough to undo what an open kitchen quietly took away. If the cooks in your family kept a separate onion basket too, say so, because it's worth knowing how many of us inherited the same old habit without ever getting the full explanation for it.